91. 91 be at towards the bottom of the page, about 59 to the bottom. So we just had a debate about oil being donated as an offering. Can you do it or not? And we ended up saying that there's actually a debate of what the laws are, and that debate is contingent upon when you derive things out, you derive things and there apply all its details from its section. You just learn out one thing from the other section, but its own rules, it follows its own rules, or no. When you learn something out from, in this case, the mincha, it'll take on the rules of the mincha. So that was our suggestion at the end of yesterday. I'm going to Rapapa Abaye. Says Rapapa to Abaye, Im mincha maisila. Good morning. Im mincha maisila, Rebbe, kule alma don minomina. Rapapa says, if you're learning from that word korban mincha, so then Rebbe's going to agree. If that's what you're learning from, Rebbe's going to agree that you would take on the rules of the korban mincha. Meaning, in this case, he would agree. Everyone would agree. No one would disagree over here that since you're learning from korban mincha, and it's going to follow the rules of the mincha as opposed to the rules of the libations. Therefore, that can't be the debate about the oil. Does it need one lug of shem and 3 lugs of shem? That's not what the debate's about. Ella Rebbe me'ezrach kamarla. There's another pasuk me'ezrach, and he learns it out from there. And that's where he includes the oil donation. Can you really say that they argue about where you derive it from the word me'ezrach or korban mincha? Mimat is amar sachi. Can you really say that about Hatanya? It says in the Brayta korban mincha melamed shemisnav vin shemen. Korban mincha, it says about the teaches you, the word korban mincha teaches you that what? That you can donate shemen. We pointed out that the word korban here is extra, the word sacrifice. It could just say mincha. The extra word korban is coming to include a category of offering, such as donating oil and will be put onto the altar. So you have an explicit brisa that says that the place that you learn at the source of donating oil as a sacrifice is from the word korban mincha. Fine. How much oil would be required under this category? Shlosha lugin, 3 lug of oil. So now, Uman shamis leid amar shlosha lugin. Who's the one who holds you need 3 lug of oil? Rebbe he. It's the opinion of Rebbe. V'kamaisila mi korban. And you see, Rebbe learns it out from the word korban mincha. Not like you, Rav Papa, suggested from the word mi ezrach. He learns it out from the word korban mincha. So Rav Papa's suggestion is thrown out, and we go back to our old suggestion of oil itself is comparable to libations, things you pour onto the altar. Its source is a flour offering. When you learn it from a flour offering, does it take on the characteristics of a flour offering? Or you just learn out the source from the flour offering, but the rules are going to be like regular libation. That's the debate. So to that, he responds, Amarle, Itanya Tanya. Okay, if you have a brisa explicitly against me, my hands are in the air. I have nothing to say. So really, we go back to our original understanding of that the source is korban mincha, and the debate of the details that we had in the 15 lines above is exactly this idea. When you derive things, do you derive it all from your new source, or just you derive it from place A, but it'll have all the rules of place B? Fine. So that's the end of that. Oil donations, 2 opinions earlier. It has to go fully on the altar. You can or it gets eaten by kohanim. How much oil you need, and that is coming from this idea of when you derive things. How do you understand the nature of the derivation? Okay. Amar Shmuel, Hamisnadev Yayin. So now you want to offer wine. So what do? Maybe umizalfa al gabi ishin. Okay, you want to offer wine. You got your fancy new bottle of wine, and you want to offer it as a sacrifice. So what are you going to do with it? You're going to take the wine and pour it onto the fire. Al gabi ha'ishim. Ishim like the word ish. Al gabi the ishim. You're going to pour it there. Why would you do that? My time Amar Kra. The yayin takrib lenesech chatziyahin. Ishe reach nichoach la'Hashem. So it says when you put wine as a libation, it says Ishe Reach Hashem. It should be a fire offering, and that's pleasant to God. So what does that mean? A fire offering means you put it on the fire. It says Gemara, but hold on, you're gonna have one of these conflict of values. On the one hand, you have to pour it onto the altar. On the other hand, there's a prohibition to extinguish the fire on the altar. Yeah, says the Gemara. Okay, but hold on, you made an assumption. Extinguishing means any amount of extinguishing, even the smallest little of extinguishing. But is that true? Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Kibui b'miktzas lo shmei kibui. Maybe extinguishing means fully extinguish the fire from the altar. There has to be some fire on the altar always. So as long as you leave some on the fire, you're good to go. So pouring wine on the altar will extinguish a little bit of the fire, but it won't put it out completely, and therefore you're not in violation. Says Gemara, Ini, is that true that partial extinguishing is not considered extinguishing? So if you're a fireman, it's for sure not considered extinguishing. You're gonna do the whole job, right? So, yeah, if you come back and you say, I put out part of the fire, you get fired. No pun intended. Yeah. Okay. So Ini Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avuha. So says Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avuha, Hamorid gechalas me'al gabei mizbeach, that when one removes the coal from the altar. So let's say a coal gets removed. You remove a coal from the altar, the kiba, and you extinguish it. Chayiv. Now hold on. One coal that's still what's the good word for that? Still lit up. It's ember. Ember. I mean, it's still on fire. Lit up. Ember. Yeah. Not a coal that's ember, but an ember. Right. An ember. So an ember. So if you have an ember, so then this is where I learn English. Yeah. So I think it's in school, not at home, nowhere. So not in yeshiva, for sure not. So an ember. So what do you say? You're chayiv. Now hold on, because there's one ember. The altar is full of more, and yet you're liable. So what do you see? That you are liable for even partial extinguishing. Says Gemara, not necessarily. Maybe this is the only ember that's left at the end of a long day or something like that, and that's it. So therefore it's not approved. Okay. So that was one answer. One answer to why you're not liable could be is because partial extinguishing is not considered extinguishing. Another answer is maybe as long as you're doing a mitzvah, there's no prohibition of extinguishing. Sometimes you have a positive commandment pushed away a negative commandment. Ema kibui the mitzvah shiny. Maybe the kibui. Maybe you're doing a mitzvah of putting the wine onto the altar. So even if partial extinguishing would be an issue, it would be prohibited, but not if you're doing a mitzvah. If you just decide to just put water on the altar and partially put it out, then that's a violation. But if you donate the wine and you're doing a mitzvah now by pouring it onto the altar, and it says Ishay Reach Nichol Hashem, putting it on the fire gives pleasantness to Hashem, so that would not be a violation. Now, Tashma, the Tanur Rabbi Dovid ben Yaakov Klape Shenasna Torah Litra Yachol Yichbe Yitram. So now, since it says Rabbi Dovid ben Yaakov about the Trumas Hadeshen, is the first thing they do in the morning is take out the ashes from yesterday. So, so you would think that when the Torah says to go separate the ashes away, Yachol Yichbe Yitram, you would think that maybe you could put it out if there's still an ember going from the previous day's ashes. You could put it out and then separate it. So Amris lo yichba. No, says you can't do that. You cannot put out an ember. So you come in the morning at 4 a.m, and you come and you see there's a few embers from yesterday. So no, you cannot put it. You can't put it out. Now that would only be a partial extinguishing. So that sounds like it should be approved that that partial extinguishing would be prohibited. Not partial extinguishing. For a mitzvah would be prohibited. You're doing a mitzvah called Trumas Hadeshen, separating the ashes out, separating all the coals out, the embers out. And yeah, we prohibit you from putting it out. But 1 second, you're involved in a mitzvah. If you're involved in a mitzvah, so then why is it prohibited? Oh, what do you see from here? Even though you're doing a mitzvah, it's still prohibited. That knocks out our second answer. So says the Gemara, not necessarily, because maybe here you have a way out. After the Yosef and Utter, you can sit and wait. Sit and wait for it to go out. Now, my question was like, how long you have to wait for? Meaning, so Trumas Hadeshen only goes long until the morning sacrifices start again. Like, you don't have all day to sit there, wait for the ember to go out. So at what point can you put it out? Never? Or likely cases, it'll go out, I don't know.
But if the fire gets relit every day, or the Trumas Hadeshen is taking out the ashes. Right. But do you have kind of a fire in the middle and then the ashes?
I think so.
You leave a little fire.
I think there's a continuous we have in the show. Culture. I don't know. H2 comes back. Let's see. Three of a few different pyres that all I don't know. Good question.
The word ember.
Ember. Oh, okay. Jules and art school, one and the same. Yeah. Tashma. Yayin Kedivra Rebbe Kiel is talking. Okay, so wine as a libation, wine is a voluntary offering. Sorry, according to Rebbe Kiva, we'll go into the bowls. Shemen Kedivra Rebbe Tarfon Leishim. So wine, we're saying now. This Bryce says wine when you voluntarily offer wine will go into bowls, but oil straight on the fire. That's one. The Otan, another Bryce says Yayin Nesat was fallen. Oh, Leishim. This is wine. So I take out the word Nesat. Yain lineseth, yeah, not idolatrous wine, but yain for libations. And yain lineseth for libations, lis fallen. That goes into both, or maybe it goes straight onto the altar. Which one is it? Amris lo yichbeh. What do you mean? It says you can't put it out. But you have to put the wine into a bowl, and the bowl you're going to pour on the sides of the altar, but not pour straight onto the fire. So what do you see? Pouring on, even though you're involved in a mitzvah, it's still going to be prohibited to do. It says lo yichbeh that you cannot put it out. So, okay, so that's a problem. So says, what was it? Shmuel. Yeah, says Shmuel. Shmuel is one who says you're allowed to put it under the fire, but this Bryce says you can't. It says lo yich, but you can't put out the fire. Lo kasha, Hareb Yehuda, Hareb Shimon. So Shmuel says it's not a kasha. There's Rabbi Yehuda and there's Rabbi Shimon. Now, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, really this is a Shabbos debate, but it applies other places as well. They debate about something called a davar she'eino mischaber, something which you don't have intent for. Classic cases when you're dragging a bench, let's say, and there's it might make a hole in the ground, it might not make a hole in the ground. Mm-hmm. Now you don't have intent to make a hole in the ground. You want to just drag the bench. So as long as there's a chance that it's not going to make a hole in the ground, it's called a davar she'eino mischaber. And Rabbi Yehuda says that it's prohibited, and Rabbi Shimon says that it's permitted. Mm-hmm. So in this case, also you're pouring onto the fire. So your intent is not to put out the fire. Your intent is just to put the wine on. So therefore, that which Shmuel said is permitted to do reflects the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. That which the Bryce says is prohibited to do reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And there's one famous point here is that this debate, what we call a davar she'eino mischaber, something, a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, is only a debate where the second thing is not inevitably going to happen. So when you're dragging the bench, it might not make a hole in the ground. But there's a debate when the hole happens. Is that prohibition or is that not prohibition? But when it's inevitable, that's what we call a psik ratio. A psik ratio literally means to cut the head off. It means when it's for sure going to happen, everyone agrees that it's prohibited. If you open that fridge and the bulb turns on, let's say it happens in that they call it a psik ratio. Right, versus doing something and it might or might not. So here the commentaries struggle with when you're pouring wine straight onto the fire. This is not Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon. It's called a psik ratio, which they give different answers. Maybe it goes onto the altar first, and then or it goes onto the limbs of the animal, maybe, and then onto the fire. They find a way where there's a delay, some kind of delay, because if there's no delay, then even Rabbi Shimon, who's lenient, like davar she'eino mischaber, across the whole Tractate of Shabbos, says many times. He agrees, of course, a psik ratio is going to be something which is prohibited. But that's a point of a famous point here when you come to the topic of a psik ratio on Shabbos. This Gemara is in the center of that discussion because from here you learn out what's and what's not considered a psik ratio. Very interesting. So okay, Rabbi Shimon, Lememra. Hold on, okay, fine. So that's going to be good technically. The problem is the Shmuel hold like Rabbi Shimon. You're saying that Shmuel hold like Rabbi Shimon. Remember the Shmuel curve. Shimon Tzvir Lev, Hamar Shmuel, Makabe Gatels, Shama Takas Bishas Rabim, Bishvil Shlo Yizoku Barabim. Shmuel says if you have a metal, something which is burning, like something which is burning of metal, I don't know, some metal burning in a public domain, so you're allowed to put it out that the public doesn't get injured. Okay. Aval lo gachel shel eitz, but you cannot put out you can't just put out an ember on Shabbos. So now, let's just say the words. If you hold the Reb Shimon, so then it should be prohibited to put out it should be permitted to put out on Shabbos the ember if it's in the middle of the road, and people might get injured by it. Now, one very fat assumption is being made over here. There's another thing in Shabbos called a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, where you're doing a prohibited act, but what eina tzricha legufa means is a whole debate. But let's just say simply, you're doing it, but not for the intention that it's being done, that it was done in the tabernacle. So, for example, carrying something from point A to point B, that's the example. It's prohibited to transfer something. Now, the case in the Mishnah and Shabbos is you have a dead person, God forbid, in your house, and you want him out. You don't care to bring him to point B. You just need him out of here. So that was not the intention that the prohibition of carrying was done in the tabernacle. That was to get to point B. Here you're just removing because whatever it smells or whatever it is, you want it out. So that's called a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Here Rabbi Shimon is lenient, and Rabbi Yehuda again is stringent. But we're making an assumption that Shmuel, who was agreeing to Rabbi Shimon by a davar she'eina miskaven, where you don't have the intention, is going to hold of Shmuel of Rabbi Shimon by a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. That's a big fat assumption. Even to put out, what are you doing? You're putting out the wood because it's in the middle of the street, the middle of Capitol Highway. So it's the middle of the sidewalk. Everyone's walking the shul. You're not putting it out in order to use the ashes for whatever, for your son's chasna the next day, or for whatever you're going to use them for. You just want them out to be out because people shouldn't get burnt. So that's a malacha. You're doing a malacha called kibui, extinguishing, but not for any productive purpose. Not for the productive purpose. It was done in the tabernacle. Just a removal of a negative, not a positive. So that is a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. So it should be permitted, says the Gemara, to break the assumption. There's such an assumption that Tosfos doesn't understand. Like, why would you compare the two? They're so not comparable. So, for example, davar she'eina miskaven can apply in other areas of Torah, I believe. A malacha she'eina tzricha legufa is only unique to Shabbos. So says the Gemara, the davar she'eina miskaven sar la Reb Shimon, the malacha she'eina tzricha legufa sar la Reb Yehuda. You're right. When it comes to a davar she'ein miskaven, a matter she'ein miskaven where you don't have intent, like kavanah and davening intent. So that's like pouring onto the altar, but you don't want to extinguish the fire. So there he'll agree to Reb Shimon, and therefore it's going to be permitted by a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, by a malacha which is you're doing the malacha on Shabbos, but not for the intent of going in the tabernacle. There he'll agree to Rabbi Yehuda, which prohibits it, and therefore it'll come out that according to Shmuel, you can pour the wine onto the altar as libation, even though it's going to cause the fire to go out. According to Shmuel, though, you cannot put out the ember on Shabbos if it's in a public thoroughfare. So Shmuel splits. So yeah, okay, fine. So now that concludes that discussion. Next, Amar Rav Huna, Nesachim shenitmu oselahem maracha b'fnei atzmim b'tzorfim. If you have any libations that got contaminated, what do? You have to make your own pyre for them in the courtyard, make your own little area of wood, and burn them there. It has to be in the Kodesh. You can burn it only in the Kodesh, not outside the courtyard. Now, Rashi's bothered by, I don't understand. You already have places to burn things. You already have places to burn in the base Hadeshim, in the courtyard. You already had a place to burn invalid offerings. Why do you need a place to burn invalid libations? That it seems to say that the libations, if you pour it onto where the offerings are, it's not nicker, it's not recognizable that this is what you're doing. Now, why is that a problem? I don't know. But therefore, when you make your own area and you burn the libations over there that are invalid, there it's more obvious, recognizable what you're doing. Why you need it to be recognizable, I don't know. But okay. Tanya Nami Halki, a Bryce to support this idea. They have to make your own pyre in the courtyard. It says blood, oil, flour offerings, libations that get impure. You should make a pyre, its own area of the wood of his servant and burn over there. So we see a Bryce explicitly supporting what Rav Huna said. Amalei Shmuel le Rav Chana, Bagdata, Rav Chana from something Baghdad. I see sorry, bring me 10 people. The aim Allah come and I'm going to say this look in front of them. I want this to be known to the public. Bring me. It says, bring me 10 people. And I'm going to tell everybody any libations that become impure, you have to make your own pyre and burn the offerings over there. The very end of Megillus Rus, similar idea. Boaz wants everyone to know the halacha that you can marry a lady from the Moabites and not a man. So he says, bring me. There's a Canaan. Let me tell you, let me make it public. So that's the idea. Yeah. So if you want to badmouth your friend, don't get 10 people. Bad idea. If you want to say halacha in public, so then that's a good idea. Nowadays you'd say post on a chat. Okay. Continuing. Dam chatas. So now very interesting. Dam, this is your Hanukkah gift. All about laundering clothing. I got blood on it. So, dam chatas, the blood of a chatas offering, and only by a chatas offering. Very interesting. Why? Is shenitas ala beged harei zeh ton kibus. You have to wash that clothing. Now, it's a good question. What happens if blood just in general gets on your clothing? We saw earlier that really can't happen, so we have to figure out how to balance that. But special requirement in the Torah that when a chatas, blood from a chatas offering, goes onto the beged, the clothing of the kohanim, that clothing has to be washed. Even though when the Torah mentions this, it only talks about the sin offerings that are eaten. We have outer sin offerings, inner sin offerings, and then we're going to have bird sin offerings. Now, spoiler alert, we're going to exclude the birds. We're going to figure out why. But at least within the chatas offerings, you have inner offerings and outer. Inner ones are not eaten, outer ones are eaten. So even though it's only mentioned by the by the outer chatas offerings, it says in Vayikra, you have a makom kadosh teachel about eating the chatas offerings. However, they both need laundering. Whether you're a chatas offering that blood got spilled on your garment and you're going to eat that chatas offering, or it's a chatas which is an inner chatas offering which is not getting eaten. Either way, you have to launder both in both those cases. How do I know? Shenemer Torah sachatos, Torah achas lekol chatos. It says this is the category of the chatos. All the chatos are going to have the same laws, except for a bird. We'll see why. But chatos psula. Let's say you have a chatos, but it's invalid. Ein dama ton kibos. That blood goes on the clothing. Only blood that was from a valid chatas offering, not an invalid chatas offering. Ein damaton kibus bein shaisel shasa kosher bein shaisel shasa kosher. Whether it had a moment where it was fitting to be brought. So, for example, we'll see now. Whether it was fitting and then became invalid, or it was invalid from the get-go. Let's say you slaughter it outside the courtyard. That's invalid from the get-go. Let's say it was inside and you brought it outside and brought it back in. That ezu hi shaisel shasa kosher. What's an example where it had a moment where it was valid? Shalana, if it stayed overnight until the whole day, it was fine. You left overnight, now it's invalid. And then the blood got on you. Or it was fine, then it got impure. You touched it, you were impure. So it was fine, then it became impure, and then the blood got on you. Or you took it out, it was fine, then you brought it outside the courtyard and brought it back in, and then the blood got onto your clothing. That's all things that had a moment of validity to them. The Ezui Shalo Haisalo Shasa Kosher. What's an example where there was no moment of validity to this chatas offering? Shenishcha b'chutz, when you slaughtered it, you did it outside the courtyard. Shenishcha chutz l'zman, chutzman or chutz l'komo. When you slaughtered it with the wrong intention, that it's going to be outside the right time, outside the right place. Or the shekiblu psulin as dama, or somebody invalid accepted its blood. So the Kohen that accepted the blood was actually invalid to do service. So that blood is now totally invalid, and if that gets on you, so then you don't have to. Then you would not have to wash the clothing. Yeah, valid blood from a chatas offering. Yeah, valid blood from a chatas offering. Yeah. Okay. So now, so we're going to talk about the blood of the chatas. Dam chatos, the blood of a chatos, quoting our Mishnah. The chule is like etc., meaning just paraphrasing our Mishnah. And now it's going to ask, according to the Mishnah, what did the Mishnah say? Outer sin offerings are eaten. That's explicit. You have to wash your clothing. Inner sin offerings are excluded through exposition because it says Torah's chatas. This is the subject of all the chatas offerings. It's one for all of them. One rule for all the chatas offerings. If it's one rule for all the chatas offerings, we're excluding one very important category: the birds. Afilu chatas ofnami. Even a chatas ha'ov, if it's one category for all the sin offerings, so even the bird should be included. So if that's true, though, you would have thought that even the blood of a chatas, of a bird sin offering, if the blood gets on you, you should require to clean the clothing. Hamadlomar zos. Says the Torah zos, not only this and not the bird. This coming to exclude the bird offering. So in the name of Bar Kapara, Amar Kra, another place. It says Tishachet. It says only about the ones that are slaughtered. In that section, towards the end of the 6th chapter of Vayikra, it says about slaughtering. So we're only talking about animals, chatas, that get slaughtered. The bird has malika, not shchita. So therefore, we're only talking about those. That's the second place, either zos or tishachet. Okay, says the Gemara. Hold on. If it's tishachet, and it has to be slaughtered, so ema b'nei achal chas medaber. So kidichsid b'makom kodesh te'achal aval pimi oslo. If it's talking about, maybe it's talking only about the ones that are eaten. As it says, you should eat in a holy place, but maybe not inner sin offerings. Rabbi Rachmana Torahs. Okay, but the Torah says Torahs, one category for all of them. So even a bird sin offering, a nami should also be included. Mir Rachmana Zos. The Torah goes and excludes with the word zos. So you have an inclusionary word called Torahs. You have an exclusionary word called zos. Now, those don't tell you what to exclude. We decided that the inner chatas offering included, the bird chatas offering excluded. So here we always ask, what did you see? Literally, what did you see means when you chose to include and exclude. Why do it that way? Do it the other way. Include a bird offering, exclude a inner sin offering. How did you choose to do it a different way? So it says the Gemara, what's going to answer? We're always going to choose the ones that are more comparable. If two things, if you don't know what to include in exposition, so if the more similar you are to what we're talking about, so in this case, we're saying an outer sin offering is more explicit in the Torah. Inner sin offering and bird, there's an exclusion and an inclusion. So which one goes in, which one goes out? The one that's most similar to a outer sin offering. What's that? It's more mistaber, more logical to include a inner chatas offering because that's more similar to a outer chatas offering. Why? For 7, 8, 9 different ways. Shekain behema. They're both animals. They're not birds. They are shchita. They both have shchita. The bird has malika. Tzafon. It's in the north. The kabbalah's kli. You accept the blood in a vessel versus the bird. You put it onto the altar. The keren and you put onto the horns, onto the corners of the altar. The keren. The etzba, you sprinkle with your finger. The chuda is you go to the edge. Yeah, thank you. The chuda, the ishin, and it goes straight onto the to the fire of the altar, not onto the walls. So, says the Gemara, that's a lot of comparisons. You're right, but listen, the bird has some. Adarabba, chatas ha'ol, you should include the bird. Not exclude the bird. Why? Shekain chutz kamosa v'achila kamosa. That at the end of the day, the bird is outside on the outer altar. That's more similar to the outer chatas. And the outer chatas and the bird, you can eat them. And the inner chatas, you can't. So even though you have a number of comparisons, but you see the Gemara in the question doesn't care about numbers. You want to know what's more similar. The fact that you have 8 similarities and you have 2 similarities is irrelevant in the question. To that, as often happens when you get stuck and you have things that are comparable, then you go to numbers. That's the answer. But hanach nefisha, okay, but it's way more comparisons to a inner and outer sin offering have much more, as we just mentioned, a whole bunch of them. The bird only has 2. I'm saying in a question you see, it couldn't care less about numbers. If it's comparable, it should be in. If it's not comparable, it should be out. The fact that you're more comparable doesn't necessarily get you in. It's only when now you're stuck that they're both comparable. Now you have to come on to numbers. But that itself wouldn't be the deciding factor. Just interesting. Yeah. To me. Okay. So Rabbi Yosef Amar, another source that these chatas are included in terms of the obligation to wash the clothing if the blood gets on you. Amar Kra Yochana. It's talking about the offering that you eat. That's an outer sin offering. Yochana Lazu Vilo Leacheres. So Yochana, you're gonna eat it. It and not something else. Only one you're gonna eat it. Then the blood, that blood you have to clean. But it coming to exclude it and not Lazu Vilo Leacheres. So what are we talking about? We're talking about offerings that are eaten, and it's coming to exclude other offerings that blood does not need to wash. You don't have to wash your clothing. The Ella Zoslamli, hold on. If you already have Yochlena, which is coming to only it and not something else, what do you need the other exclusionary word called Zos? This and not something else. Zoslamli. Elav Zos Hamina Yochlena Orchid Krakamash. It, eat it, bring it, carry it is the common way the Torah is speaking in that section. It's mentioning it, the whole section. So you'd have thought that when it said about this offering, that it's only this offering, you wouldn't think to exclude other offerings because you have that word it many times in that section, which does not come to exclude. So that Zos tells you when you have in that same section of blood going onto a clothing, you have to launder it or not. When it says Zos, so Zos does come. Zos teaches you that no. Zos is coming to tell you that when it says Yochlena, only it means only it and not something else. So Zos tells us that Yochlena is really is an exclusionary word. Okay. Yeah. Rabba Amar Kra Asher Yiza Behazos Hakasum Medaber. Rabba says the verse is talking about blood that is sprinkled. So meaning, Rabba's now flipping us on our head a little bit. Rabba's saying, up until this point, what was more explicit was that the offerings that are eaten, you have to launder the clothing if the blood gets on you. What Rabba's saying now is, no, the other way. Really, it's talking about sprinkling the blood. And that is talking about the inner chatas offering. That's going to be explicit, and the outer chatas offerings are going to be derived through exposition. That's what Rabbah wants. Now it talks about the sprinkling. So Rashi explained that it's talking about the sprinkling. It doesn't say the word sprinkling by the outer sin offerings. Rather, by the inner offerings, it talks about sprinkling on the parochas, on the cover. So there, you sprinkle it towards the cover of the holy area. So since we're talking about that, it's talking about an inner sin offering, and therefore an inner sin offering is what it's talking about. An outer sin offering is derived through exposition. The Brisa clearly states that when the Torah mentions laundering, we're talking about offerings that get eaten. That's obviously an outer sin offering, not an inner sin offering. So it says the Gemara, when it mentioned that, it was only talking about the Inyan Marika V'Shtifa. About the Inyan Kibus Asher Yizaksev. When it mentioned about the offerings that get eaten, it was only mentioned about purging it and washing it. You have to wash out the, I believe the vessels, right? Yeah. So you have to wash those. That's what it was talking about. When it came to actual laundering, there it says Asher Yiza. That's talking about sprinkling, and sprinkling is explicitly mentioned by the inner sin offering. Okay, but then Ihachi, we're going to have a problem with our Mishnah. The way the Mishnah's wording is going to be problematic for Rabbah. Why? If you have something which is explicit, and something which is included through exposition. So when you're mentioning them in a category, you would mention the one that's explicit first. This needs laundering, and this. The and this will be the one that's derived through exposition. You wouldn't say this needs laundering and this if the second thing was one that's explicit, right? That's like that doesn't make sense. If someone wants to invite you for a meal, they want you to come. Okay, fine, you can bring your kids. But we want you and your children. We really want you. If they're anyways visiting, then bring them too. But you wouldn't say it the other way. We want your children. We don't know who your children are, right? That's not how you would phrase it. So that's the question. It says in the Mishnah, the ones that are eaten, the echad apinimios. So it's phrasing it, the ones that are eaten, and the ones that are the inner chatas offering. Well, according to Rabbah, you should phrase it differently. Echad hapinimios, echad nechos mibayile. First the inner offerings, and then the outer offerings. So it says, all right, you're right. According to Rabbah, you would have to have a different version of the Mishnah. Yeah. Okay. If that's true, though, maybe you should include a bird. Once you're including the inner sin offering, so maybe include a bird too. No, then this can be a repetition of earlier. Zos. The Torah says Zos. Zos means this and not something else, excluding the bird. Okay, so if that's true, so then exclude the outer sin offering. Can't do that, Rahmana. Ribra Torah. It says Torah. One category for all the Chadas offering. Okay, so same thing. Exclusionary, inclusionary. What do? Well, Ma'ara is how do you see to include the outer sin offering, exclude the bird? Says the Gemara, like before. It's more logical to include the sin offering of the animal than the bird. Why? Shekain, behema, they're both animals. Shchita sapon, you slaughter in the north. The Kabbalah's clear, and you accepted the blood in a vessel. The Karen, and it goes on the corners of the altar, and with your finger, and the chud on the edge, the ishim on the fire. Says the Adrabah, chatas of a bird offering is also similar to an inner sin offering. Why? The hazah, you also have to sprinkle the bird. You have to sprinkle. Yeah, the bird also has sprinkling. That's gonna be like the inner chatas. They both have a more explicit. So that the Gemara says no, she can't. Hanach nefishin. Yeah, but at the end of the day, that's more comparable because it has more similarities numbers wise. So there's more similarities that makes it more comparable, more similar, and therefore it's included. Fine. So that concludes that. At the end of the day, you have basically a debate. Either most opinions hold that the outer sin offering, the one that's eaten, is where it's written that you have to wash the blood out, and the inner sin offering is derived through exposition. Rabbah holds the opposite, that it's more explicit by the inner sin offering that you have to wash the blood out, and the outer sin offering is included through exposition. But everyone agrees that a bird is excluded from Zos. That everyone agrees. Sorry, birds. Yeah. So, by Rabbi Oven, now that we mentioned the bird, the sin bird offering, we have a question about it. Let's say you have blood on the bird's neck. Now, if you bring blood from the outside to the inside, that's invalid. But that might be only in a vessel. What if you have blood that's on its neck that's brought inside? Is the neck like a vessel? Or no, it's considered part of the animal. Let's see. Mahu. If the neck is like a vessel, blood that's brought from the outside to the inside in a vessel is invalid. You can't do that. Or maybe it's like the neck of the animal. And on the neck of the animal, that was never excluded, the blood on the neck of the animal. It says, Midama, Amarakman of a little basara. You can't bring the blood inside. It doesn't say you can't bring its flesh inside. So when you view the blood on the neck, you view it as an external or internal. It's part of the body, or it's considered like it's removed from the body. Physically, it's on the body, but it's no longer inside the body. It was removed from inside, right? You killed it. So the blood was removed from inside. But how far does that have to be removed? Have invalidation of bringing outer blood to the inside. Maybe you would think if it's still on the body, that's still considered part of the body. It's not fully removed from the body. Or you say no. Once it's not inside anymore, it's considered for all intents and purposes, it's in a vessel. Even though technically it's lying on the body, we view the body as more of a vessel carrying the blood. Yeah, that's the question. So now, Tashma, let's bring a proof. So now, Pirchasa v'nichnas olifnim. So, yeah, this is she got a good AI video about this. Pirchasa, I guess, what's the word? Convulge? It should, after you kill it, was it? Convulsed? Is there a more common word? Or this is the most common word?
It's like,
when it flinches.
Flinches around.
There's no better word than convulsed. That's no word.
That's a pretty
common word? Okay. Okay, convulsed. Convulsed? Okay. I feel like kids convulse. Okay, whatever. So kids can't convulse, right?
The thrashings of the convulsion.
Which would tell them chocolate anymore, they freak out. They call it convulse. Okay, so anyways, an animal that gets slaughtered, and then pirchasa, it convulsed and convulses. Okay, convulses and enters inside and then comes back out.
Thrashing around.
Yeah, thrashing around. So that's ksher. That's totally valid. However, ha'ichnisa, but if you go and bring it in, then it's going to be invalid. So it's going to be invalid. So therefore, we're talking about a bird. We're talking about a bird sin offering, and we're saying that if it goes on its own, it's fine. But if you bring it in, then it's not fine. So it's after it's moved. Why else is it convulsive? Like a chick with no head, I don't know, runs in. Runs first. It says between the malika and the springing of the blood, it runs inside. I was like, why can't it be saying? Because the malika happens.
Okay.
Going to the coaching question. When it goes inside, it goes inside the place where it cannot be. So now, because its head's getting cut off, because we're cutting its head off. So it runs inside and it comes back out. It's fine. If you were to bring it inside, it's going to be invalid. And maybe that will answer our question. If you bring in the bird with the blood inside, that should also be invalid. So it says, okay, but according to that reason, when it comes to the very holy sacrifices, let's say it's in the north. You slaughter in the north. According to this, if it's pirchas of yatzal darum, it convulses and gets brought to the south part of the area. Meaning, right, we have parallel to the altar, directly parallel to the altar is the north. A debate if a little bit further up or down is also the north. But whenever you go, at some point you're going to be in the south, and that's not where you can slaughter anymore. So according to that reasoning, if you go, then it convulses and goes to the south, and then it goes back to the north because of kshero. Yeah, it's like on batteries. Yeah, because of kshero. So rethink this idea. But so that's going to be kshera. But ha-hotzia psula. What if you take it from the north to the south and then bring it back to the north? It's going to be invalid. We never heard of such a thing. They're going from the north to the south. You're not bringing it outside the courtyard. You're just moving it a little bit to the south and coming back. So that's going to be invalid. No, can't be. So it's strichale. It's just telling you that it's only kshera if it goes from the south. Because if you were to bring it, if it would go outside the courtyard, then it would be invalid. Okay, so once you're going to say that over there by the north and the south, say the same thing by us. That really what it was coming to say is, if it gets brought outside the courtyard, it's going to be invalid. It's strichale. But no proof could be brought if you go and bring it in. The point is that it's just coming to exclude a case where it goes outside the courtyard. But therefore, there's no proof to us. If you go and you bring it inside, that's not what we're talking about. We're just using that phraseology to exclude a case where it goes outside the courtyard. So therefore, we don't have a conclusive answer. Yeah. Okay. Says Rabbi Oven. Okay. By Rabbi Oven. Nishpach ala ritzba the asma. So now you have from the bird's neck, blood falls on the ground, and you scoop it back up. Mahu. So atzruchehu delo atzruche rachmana kli sharis vehilkach osu v'kosher. So maybe you'll say that by the bird sin offering, we don't need need a vessel, meaning its neck, it's its vessel. So therefore, if the blood spills and you collect it back up, it's fine to then sprinkle onto the altar. Just like if you have something in a vessel and then it spills, you can pick it back up. That's fine. But if it spills directly before going into a vessel, like a regular, let's say a regular sin offering, if that blood goes straight out to the ground, then it's invalid because it needs a vessel. Once it's in a vessel and it spills, okay, you can pick it back up. So that does not require a vessel. How do you view it? Do you view it that since it does not need a vessel, its neck is its vessel, so to speak, and therefore if it goes from there to the ground, that's fine. The same way a regular offering, if the blood goes into a vessel and then on the ground, you can scoop it back up and it's going to be fine. That's on the one hand. Odilma mifsal pasal be'rachmana klisharis vehilkach osvo u pasal. Or maybe you'll say no. Or maybe you'll say that that it does not, since it does not have a vessel, you can't view its neck like a vessel, and therefore it's like a regular offering with the blood going straight to the ground. So to here the blood goes straight to the ground, and therefore it's going to be invalid. So a similar question, is the neck like its vessel? We had earlier in terms of bringing inside where it's not supposed to go. That was one. Second thing, is the neck like a vessel? If it goes from the neck to the ground, it's like from inside to vessel to the ground, kosher, or no, from inside to the ground, invalid. So how do you view that? Amara. Tashma Yachli Hedam Chatas of Tone Kibos, you would think that a sin bird offer, a bird sin offering, requires laundering. Hamad Lomar, Zos. Zos, that's our word. Only this, only the outer, or depends how you learn if you're Rabbah or not, the outer or the inner sin offerings, only they require laundering, not the bird. And if you're going to tell me that the blood's going to be invalid, typically the ha'ifsale ba'avir kli. A little bit of a funny case now. If you're going to tell me that the blood that spills is going to be invalid, so we're assuming now that it's as it's traveling in the air onto your clothing, so it's in the airspace of a vessel. Meaning, the vessel in this case is going to be your clothing. It's in the airspace of a vessel, and it should already be invalid because it's in the airspace of a vessel, and therefore you wouldn't need zos. Yeah. The chatas ov has to be the blood. If you didn't have the word zos to exclude it, you should say that once it's flying in the air towards your garment, so then it has like the status of the vessel, and once it's going to have the status of a vessel, it's now going to be no longer fitting to be sprinkled, and therefore it should be invalid because it's a bird. There's no vessel by a bird, so it should be invalid from that. So the word zos, you would not need the word zos to teach you that. It says Gemara, no, you can't bring a proof from there. Why? Because we need the word zos for the following case. If you just there was no airspace. You just touched the bird onto the clothing. There was no airspace. So you would have thought that in that case, maybe it never got invalidated. And therefore, maybe that blood is good blood that would require now laundering. To which the Torah says Zos comes to exclude that case, that you don't need laundering for that case. But we don't have a proof if the blood from the bird offering is if the neck is like a vessel or not. We have no proof from there. Yeah. So now, Bami Levi nitaz mi beged lebeged mahu. If blood squirts from one garment to another garment. So now we're talking now about back to the blood of an animal. So the only blood that's fit to cause laundering is blood that's kosher. It's fit to be sprinkled on the altar. So now, mi beged kama edchile lekibus. Once it left the first garment, so now it's like it cannot be brought up onto the altar, because once it's on the garment, now that blood has to be washed out of the garment. So that blood can't be used anymore to sprinkle onto the altar. Catch 22. It was good. Now it's on your Now it's on your clothing. You have to now wash out the clothing. That blood has to be washed out. You cannot put on the altar anymore. If it goes from there to a second garment, that's now blood that was unfit for the altar. So that's on the one hand. Odilma lo. Maybe at the end of the day, it's still blood that was originally fit for the altar, and therefore it would require a second garment to get washed out. So,
class if we're not going to catch it otherwise.
well, what's this? Where all these presents
I'm
coming?
going to from the class.
Oh,
The big class.
Requesting